Hello and welcome to today's podcast. It's so nice to have you here on this first Saturday in May. You're listening to CMajor before the show. I'm your host, CMajor Porter, and we have a lot to cover today. We're talking about technique and artistry. We're talking about finger numbers. We're talking about how to count those numbers. So if you have ever wondered about that, do your fingers have numbers? That's what we're talking about today. You're listening to CMajor before the show. So this is a fun lesson for me. It's a fun class because I'm always amazed how my young students, the ones that have small hands, they are for the first time learning that they can assign a number to their fingers, and they're always so amazed. I will ask the question, do you know your fingers have numbers? Like, they do? So for small hands, I ran across a really great article in Pianist magazine. So if you happen to pick up a copy of that magazine, there's an article out now talking about this. For small hands, how do you develop technique? Now, I have not read the article. It just came across my desk. So if you want to check it out, check out Pianist magazine. I believe it's published by Warner Publications. And you can sign up for the mailing list. They will send you a ton of emails based on your interests and things like that. But we like to also share with you some of the resources that we use here on the podcast. But if you ever wondered about that, today is hopefully going to add some clarity to that. And then later on, if you can join me over at the CMajor radio show, we will do some drawing, because over there we like to write things down. So we're getting closer, getting a little bit more clarity here on the podcast, becoming a little bit more clear about the topics that we're talking about, and becoming more comfortable with the audience. So I'm excited. I have some exciting things to share today. So if you have a basic method book, you will find this usually at the front of the book. The book will introduce finger numbers. So far we've talked about hand positioning at the piano. We've talked about how to keep your hands curved. We've talked about how to sit tall at the piano. We've talked about that. And so these are like the beginner conversations that you want to have even before you jump into the music making. And it's so important. I think it's important. Now, I do have students who are still working on this. And for some students, it's more a work in progress. But let's pretend that you have a method in front of you. If you don't have one, to just open your minds with us today. And this content, by the way, is something that's universal. It's not that anyone owns finger numbers. It's nothing like that. But every good method, I think, will talk about this and give you a chance to decide for yourself if you can follow the rules, more or less. Okay? So let's do something fun. Let's hold your hands up in front of you, if you can. And let's just do some wiggling, okay? So we're going to wiggle our fingers all around. Again, if I had a video that was doing this with me, you could see me wiggling my fingers. But it's supposed to be fun to do. Okay, then after you've done that, now I want you to start wiggling one at a time. So if you can, get both your thumbs out and just start wiggling. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Okay, now, get those pointer fingers going. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle for the pointer fingers. Next, tall fingers. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Fourth fingers. We call those the ring fingers. You want to wiggle those. And then the pinkies. You want to wiggle those. Okay, now we're going to assign numbers to those. So let's go back to wiggling the thumbs. Okay, So you would call that 1. So even though it's a thumb, we're going to call it finger 1. So don't get your thumb confused with your pointer finger and think that your pointer finger is 1. In piano, we call the thumbs 1. Okay, so wiggle your thumbs and say 1. Okay, now wiggle those pointer fingers and say 2. Next, wiggle those tall fingers and say 3. Next, wiggle those fourth fingers and say 4. That's your ring finger. And the last, wiggle your little fingers and say 5. Okay, now I'm going to have you clap your hands together. Okay. And now you're just going to tap. Okay, so when I say tap once, you tap those thumbs. Tap ones. Okay, tap 2s. Tap 3s. Tap 4s. Okay, tap 5s. Okay, now we're just going to shake it out for a minute. Okay, so shake it out. Shake it out. Get all that energy out. How are you feeling right now? I didn't even ask how you're feeling today. Hopefully you're having a good day so far. It's Saturday. First Saturday in May. Can you believe it? And a lot of people are starting to get out and about here in the greater New York area. We're all very scared of that. But we're all just hoping and praying that people will do the right thing and stay 6 feet apart. So on today's photo for the podcast, you'll see a picture saying 6 feet apart, because I think that's the message that we're all sending, especially today. We've just reopened some of the golf clubs, the golf places where people play golf, and the parks and so forth. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen, right? Okay, now, if you finish shaking it all out, now I'm going to have you tell me if you know your left hand from your right hand. I have to add some laughter to that, because believe it or not, some people don't know that. And I mentioned it at the end of last week's podcast. That is not anything to be embarrassed about. There are many times when I have to tell my adult students, not that right, the other right. Because they'll be thinking right hand, but they'll somehow try to use their left hand to do something that I'm asking. But we'll solve this problem over at the CMajor radio show, because once you start to draw your hands and trace your hands, you can also think in terms of color. Something I love to do. One of my favorite topics, when we first started this podcast, we were talking about color and the importance of color. So interesting. And then a lot of people started talking about color all over the internet. So I guess that makes me an influencer, right? I don't know about that. I don't want to come off as arrogant or a narcissist or anything like that. I really am trying to help people. So I like being an influencer, though. It's kind of fun. So we were talking about color. We were talking about how piano was taught in the 1950s and how color was used among families and how some of these old-fashioned songs were used and these melodies that even children seem to know. But we're not going to get back into that today. But it was a very interesting time to talk about all of that. But we will use color over at the CMajor radio show. So if you happen to be over there with us a little bit later, please bring your coloring pens and pencils, and we're going to have some fun, some visual fun over there. Okay, now what I want you to do is raise your left hand. Okay? Raise your left hand. Wave your left hand in the air. Now, if you ever gone to a rap concert, they always have you do this, don't they? They do. It's so fun. And it's so funny. You're like looking at them do this and nobody has a problem. Or maybe they don't say raise your left hand in the air. They say, so raise your hand in the air. I think they do more like that. So, but anyway, We're going to give a shout out to some of my rap friends a little bit later, so stay listening for that. In the method books, you may see an L and an H labeled on hands. And so what that means is your left hand. So look for this throughout the beginner part of your book when you start to play songs, because some methods will have the left hand in a particular color as well as the letters L and H. And then some books kind of leave it to you to decide which color you want to use. Let's say if you don't enjoy the color purple, then you don't have to respond to the color purple. Suppose you want to use the color blue to distinguish your left hand. Okay, but the important thing is, on your left hand, your thumb is still going to be 1. Second finger, your pointer finger is 2. Tall finger is 3. So right now you should be having your hands in the air, or at least the left hand in the air, wiggling that 3. And then the fourth finger, the ring finger, that's 4, and then the pinky is 5. Okay, so put that down. Let that hand go on vacation for a minute. And now we're going to raise the right hand. Now, you hear this in court. Raise your right hand, or put your right hand here and repeat after me. Or in a ceremony, like in a wedding or something, right? But now we're going to use it here in piano in our class. So raise your right hand, wiggle your right hand thumb, your pointer finger, your tall finger, your ring finger, that's 4, and then your little finger, that's 5. So hopefully you've been able to keep up with the finger counts. Okay, and if you have any problems counting, go to Sesame Street. One of my favorite Sesame Street characters is the Count. I mean, he always keeps everybody on point, doesn't he? So that's basically it, if you can remember that, okay? And not get your 1 confused with your 5. I have students that get that confused. And also just be aware of how your book is teaching you. Is your book using what we call a middle C approach, where both thumbs are going to be sharing C? So if you have both ones on C, then that's one way to position your hands. And then there's another position that you can use called the C major position. The one I really love is the multi-key position, where you start off with C, but then you go quickly up half steps, using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but in different positioning on different keys. But that's something to think about. So that's the reason for doing a meet and greet, or that's the reason for doing some sort of meeting ahead of time, or a consultation. So I'm going to tell you how to get in touch with me to do those things online as well, and hopefully you'll be able to meet me online, because I'm really looking forward to meeting you. Okay, so now we're going to step away from these finger numbers, and the reason is because we're going to go to a different method and see what they have to say about the numbering of the fingers. You're listening to C Major Before the Show as I gather my materials. I'll give you a music break and I'll be right back. your host, CMajor Porter. You are listening to CMajor Before the Show. It's a great pleasure to be with you on this first Saturday in May here in the greater New York City area. And it's sunny outside. There's no rain. And what I'm trying to do is to get you to think about finger numbers. It takes a lot of patience. You have to listen. You have to have the enthusiasm to want to learn that your fingers have numbers and then put it to use. That's all you have to do. But there are other ways. There are more pedagogical approaches to getting you to do something like this. So we're going to explore that over at the CMajor Radio Show. If you happen to be available this afternoon, you are invited to join us over there, and we'd be happy to have you. I'll say a little bit more about that toward the end of the podcast. But we've just been talking about which hand is your left hand and which hand is your right hand, because finger numbers will be on each hand. It's important. You need to be able to distinguish your left from your right hand. Now, for younger children, this takes some time. So you know how it was as a child, that sometimes you put your right shoe on your left foot and vice versa. Same thing happens with piano. It takes some time before you can really start to recall which one you're calling the left hand, because it's labeling. So for young children, it may take some time to get it, but they seem to get it pretty quickly because they're really determined to get it. So I've also seen situations where the piano teacher will play and then let the young child kind of place their hand over the knuckle of the teacher as the teacher plays, and that gives some sort of confidence as well. But you can play lots of games. So let's say that you needed to place different color stickers on the keys or different color stickers on your hands. You can do that. Or when we start to draw our hands over at the CMajor Radio Show, we'll have you pick out your favorite stickers to do that over there. Tapping, we did that, right? What I didn't do, I didn't mix up the numbers. So I didn't call out tap 5, now tap 3, now tap 4, tap 1, tap 2. You can mix this up. You can have someone help you with something like that, okay? Another thing you can do is to think about your hand shape. Think about motion. Play games with that, Open up your imagination. Thinking beyond what I call the purple dot. When you think beyond what's obvious, and then use your imagination to make something fun out of it, right? Okay, now, another thing you can do if you're having trouble is you can, again, start to create more visual ways to remember your finger numbers. So again, we will practice this more over at the CMajor Radio Show. Maybe perhaps make some finger flashcards. And so, again, this content you will see throughout many methods. Nobody owns this way of presenting material to you. And it's shared across methods. So it's a very standard thing to do. And if you don't want to use the word flashcards, we don't have to use the word flashcards. We can use something else to get you in the mindset. And I believe there are probably a ton of apps out there as well that will help you with something like this. Okay, because it really is about understanding the numbers and then understanding patterns. Okay, now, the reason why we wanted to spend some time with the finger numbers is because when you start to play songs, your fingers will be assigned to certain keys. So just a heads up, for next week, we will start thinking about some of the keys that you can play with certain fingers. Now, this is fun. I just love all of it, but this is really fun for me because I like to know which keys my students prefer. Do you prefer the black keys or do you prefer the white keys? And so something to think about. Some of my students prefer playing on black keys. They find that easier because all they have to do is think in groups. And some of my students prefer to play the white keys. So that we will explore on next week's episode. Okay, now before I move away from the topic of do your fingers have numbers, I'm just going to share with you something that's really advanced because, again, I was so inspired by this one teacher that was talking about her studio and how she was able to teach over 30 students online already. I thought, wow, she must really be a great teacher. Okay. And one of the things she mentioned was that before she started piano lessons, that she played organ, that her father wanted to see if she was even serious about playing a keyboard. So imagine that. I just wonder what some of her finger challenges would have been when she did get to the piano. But next week, we're going to talk about how you have printed fingering and how to follow what's on the page or change it so that it works for you. So when I work with my students on thinking outside the purple dot, that's what they do. They think, oh, let me change this so that it works for me a little bit better. I'm going to write in some new fingerings. One case where this happens, it happens with students who don't like to repeat the same note with different fingers. And the reason for that is that the method wants you to think of interchanging the finger numbers, not just thinking, oh, if you're on middle C, that your thumb has to be assigned to that note. So that's the reason for that. Now, the technique comes into play when you are going to put into use what we talked about last week. Will you be playing with curved fingers once you learn your finger numbers, or will you play with flat fingers? Will you play with long nails, or will you play with short nails? And how close will your fingers be to the keys? What is your contact going to feel like? So these are very important questions for piano, but also very important questions for organ as well. And in organ, you really have to learn a lot about finger independence. And if you ever listen to the music of Bach, you know how important it is to make sure your fingers can speak independently and that you hear all of the voices, and fingering plays such a huge role in that. Even when you play an organ, there's something called finger crossing. So I just had a student that was working on chromatic scales and chromatic playing, and it was so fun to see him figure out if he was going to go 1-3-1-3-1-3 or 1-2-1-2-1-2, or combine 1-2 and 1-3 as he went up the keyboard and came back down again. And then you get into another technique where you have to play in thirds, which is always tricky. So I love that you see a lot of that technique and artistry in the music of Chopin, for instance. So that's always fun. But in organ, we do something called finger substitution. And it's supposed to be a natural and a necessary technique to help with your legato playing, because the organ doesn't have weighted keys. Now, you're probably saying to me, well, on a keyboard, can't you get an organ sound? Yes. So if you have a weighted key keyboard and you switch the sound to organ, then yes, then you will have keys that are weighted, but you still have to think about maybe playing your fingers in a way that it sounds smooth, and how are you going to do that. So there's something called finger substitution, finger crossing, that you can work on. So I liked organ playing for that reason. I like the manuals. I never quite became comfortable with the pedals the way that I wanted to, but there's still time for that. Also in organ, there's a technique called glissando. And you'll be really amazed how this technique works. How you're able to slide from one key to the next using one particular finger. And so you have to make sure that you're moving the fingers in a certain way and not using your arm, not using your hand. And then there's something called a glissando, where you just descend or ascend with one finger, usually the thumb. And so they call that a thumb glissando. It's also possible on organ to play thumb glissandos from white keys to black keys. So probably a little too much information for you if you're just starting out in piano, but I wanted to give you some food for thought, so something to think about. Now, I'll tell you another thing that happened since I last spoke with you, and I had a student that I was working on with fingering for music for video games. Now, that's a real challenge. So if you ever played the music of video games, I'm not going to name a particular one right now, but I have one in mind. It really helps if you know your fingering. And then you can decide if you want to get into some sort of technique book. You've heard me mention Hannon here on the podcast, and some other technique books that are out there, and that some teachers are really into formal technique, whereas others go, no, don't worry about that so much. But everyone is different. Okay, I'm going to come back in just a moment. I want to get a sip of water. And then when I come back, we'll talk about some of the projects that I have going, some of the collaborations I have going, and do some shout outs. And so I'll see you back here in a few moments. You're listening to CMajor Before the Show. You are here on CMajor Before the Show. I'm your host, CMajor Porter. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. We've been talking about finger numbers and do your fingers have numbers and keep your hands in the air and so forth. So it's a fun thing to do. So the next time you go to a rap concert, when we all are able to do that again and keep 6 feet apart and all of that, I want you to think about that. When you're waving your hands in the air, think that you're also waving your finger numbers as well. So I've been doing a lot of work with families in the greater New York area, and the work really is centered around popular music, something that really surprised me. So what I'm finding that I have to do is to partner with these families in a way that they understand that it doesn't matter which music you play. You really kind of have to think about how you're going to get there with the music making. That it can't really be rushed. It's not a process of, will my 6-year-old son be able to play the music of Styx in 6 weeks? Probably not. I mean, to argue that, anyone can pick out a melody that you're hearing on television if you have the motivation and the talent to do it and the natural gift to do it. That's how I started out. My parents had the Charlie Brown episodes on television during Christmas time and were amazed. I was able to go right to the piano and start playing the Linus and Lucy song. And this was before I was 7. And so something like that, you don't think, okay, were they using the right fingers when they were doing that? You don't think that. You just think, oh, they're really picking up music. Let me get them into some lessons. But here's the thing. Once I started taking piano lessons, my piano teacher then say, okay, now we're going to learn all the songs in the Charlie Brown book. You're going to learn Linus and Lucy, then you're going to learn skating, then you're going to learn Fur-Elise. She didn't do that to me in the first year. And it's so puzzling to me why sometimes families think that's going to happen in the first year. Let me tell you something. It took me a good 2 years to be really proficient at piano enough to start playing in the community at events and accompanying singers, accompanying choirs, accompanying congregations in the case of church service, and being comfortable to play in front of people on the spot, spontaneously, and to be comfortable enough to start transposing the key. So you quickly find out that your foundation in piano is what really matters. And I never thought, oh, I'm in this to learn songs. I was in it to learn music. So how to really get that message across to the families that I work with is a mission that I'm on right now. And it's not because I think I'm smarter than anyone and all of that. I don't like to think that way. I really like to think I'm trying to solve a problem. So I enjoy my work. I'm collaborating with other teachers, becoming a better music teacher in the spirit of teachers helping teachers. And so I want to give a shout out right now to all of my colleagues and other teaching artists who are hard at work trying to keep music making going in our society. And let me tell you, the music that you put out there and the work that you do is so important, because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? You know, I had a friend who was in a cover band, and he came to me in tears at one point, and he said to me, you know, my community really needs you. And as it turned out, I ended up working in his community for a short amount of time. And then when I left to pursue something else, he felt sad because he thought, well, who's going to keep teaching our children? That was basically what he said. And I heard that concern in his voice. And it was for the first time I realized there was a need for this, because sometimes you can think, oh, you know, here in the Northeast, there's so many resources, so many ways that people can just pick up an instrument and start learning on their own. They'll just learn it on their own. But at the same time, to really try to tap into that community that wants formal education. You know, I think the thing that really puzzles me again is that there's a pivot. Sometimes you go into a situation thinking you're going to be teaching in a formal way, and then almost out of nowhere, it's like you're blindsided, and somebody comes to you and says, well, when are you going to learn this? When are you going to teach us a song? When are we going to learn to play a song? And I'm always so blown away by that question, because I thought you said you wanted to learn method. Now you're telling me you want to learn a song, but I think it's because they start to feel pressure from their families. Well, can't you play anything yet? You know, so to the families, I would just say to you, please, allow your children to grow, to flow, to develop naturally, because it really does make a difference. Now, having said that, how did I grow? And was my family happy with the way that I played? And I can tell you the short answer on that was no. No, they weren't. Because I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert that likes to do extroverted things. And so, for someone who is very into being quiet and observing and expressing later when I become comfortable, I'm not one who's going to get on the organ and start playing like I'm trying to think of the name of that guy. Billy, can't think of his last name right now, but you probably know who I'm talking about. Very well-known organist who passed away, or some of the other flashy organists that get on and just start tearing up the organ, or some of those musicians that I mentioned last week. Billy Preston, that's what I was trying to think of. So, for family members to go, well, how come you can't play like that? And I'm thinking, well, I didn't know that's what you were looking to have me do. I thought I was just learning to play well. And I think that's it. I think if you just keep the mindset that you are into music making, to make the best music you can make, something we say a lot on this podcast, and to play your very best and to do your very best. That's really the most that you can ask for. So, to the children that are trying to learn music, keep on keeping on. If I can say that, it's going to be worth it in the long run. You're on that long journey to learn to make music as a lifelong quest, and to just stay on that road. It doesn't mean that you have to major in it. It doesn't mean that you have to become a performer or an entertainer. But it will serve you, and it will serve you well if you just stay on that path. And so focus on method, and maybe not so much on songs all the time. That's the message that I want to send. I want to get some more shout outs. This time you're going to be very surprised, because I do pay attention to hip hop. I pay attention to rap. I pay attention to all music. But I recently learned about some music that was coming out for this particular group that's been around for 40 years. So a big shout out, a big cheer, big applause for the Sugar Hill Gang and Grandmaster Melly Mel and Scorpio, Hen Dog, Diamond, Wonder Mike, Master G. And the music that you guys are doing is amazing. And you know how I found out about this, because since the whole coronavirus, COVID-19, I've been listening to Glitterbox, and they've been playing your music. So shout out to you guys. So amazing to see these guys still around all these years, And not only that, just here in the Northeast, there's so many great musicians that recorded so much great music. And not that I'm promoting Glitterbox, I'm really not. I don't even have permission to be talking about them, but I'll just say a little bit more. If you like dance music, music of the 70s and 80s in particular, during the disco era, and you like that type of beat, then check it out. You might find it fun to listen to. And some of the comments that people make is just right in line with what I'm thinking. I was like, yeah, I knew that music by the Ohio Players. I've been listening to them since I was 7 years old in second grade. And my English teacher put on some music and we were doing the bump. that's the kind of thing that makes you really recall how music has played a large role in your life. So it didn't matter if you were playing music in a community or if you were listening to music, just being surrounded by music made a big difference. So I'll say a little bit more about that in the future, but right now I want to give another shout out to my colleagues who are teaching artists. I think I mentioned already we're doing collaborations, and so I really appreciate knowing some of the work that you're doing. It's just amazing. And not just performing artists and musicians, but visual artists, teachers that are into crocheting and painting and drawing. And it's just nice to finally be a part of a community. And it feels like my dreams came true in the last year, because I've been saying, oh, I wish I could have these conversations, and finally I get to have those conversations, and it's wonderful. It really is, to think about research and think about pedagogy and to be able to have that dialogue over a cup of coffee is just amazing. So shout out to them. Now, my next shout out is to the platforms that I've been recently introduced to, and just really amazed by how much they're really getting behind the teachers on this platform. So you've heard me mention Meethook a few times already. I will continue to mention Meethook because I want you to meet me over at Meethook. And they're on Instagram, they're posting information about the teachers, not just me, but other great teachers. Now, when you see this roster of teachers, it's going to blow your mind, because these are people that have been on the road with some of the biggest names of concert tours. I mean, teachers that perform in front of 100,000 people and more through Live Nation and you name it. Anyone who has toured at that level, and they're teaching, they're available on Meethook for a discussion, for a consultation, for a lesson. If you can even imagine that, it just blows your mind. But anyway, so grateful to Meethook. I heard about it through the grapevine, and thank you so much for letting teachers do what they do on your platform. Shout out to you. So great, so good. So when you see me post that link, please check it out. It'll probably appear as app.meethook.com, and you'll see it, and then just check out the profile and let me know if you want to have a discussion, or if you want to consult me about anything about music making before you actually jump in, things like that, because there's so much online right now, especially with the coronavirus situation. There are a lot of people out there pitching themselves as piano lesson services. So you may just want to talk with somebody who really knows before you jump into something like that. Then you owe this ton of money for a course that may or may not fulfill your dreams. But best wishes to anybody online who's teaching, who needs to do that to support themselves. So I don't want to knock anybody's hustle. So good luck to you guys out there. Now, I want to give a shout out to this other platform. Before I do, let me say one more thing about Meethook. Please see me over there. Every week, what I'll try to do is post my availability for that week. And what I've been doing is just making myself available from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. for lessons online. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. So in some places in the world, it's midnight right now. It's not midnight over here. It's almost 3 o'clock. But if you needed to have a lesson with me, you can get in touch with me there. And I think they have a cutoff time for our time zone here in the U.S., but you should be able to work that out based on where you are in the world and just knowing what my availability is. So I will be posting my availability, and I'll give a shout out online. My availability is now posted on Meethook, and then provide the link. So the next shout out I want to give is to a platform that I'm very excited about as well, and it's because I know someone who knows someone who created this platform. Same thing with Meethook. I knew someone who knew about this platform, and they were shouting it out online, and that was so cool, and I was able to follow that, so I actually know the person. So it's just nice to have that type of connection. But I found out this week that Tone Row is a website that was developed by a professor in New York. So through one of my colleagues, it turns out that was her professor at Manus College who developed that platform, or at least developed that website, and I thought, very cool. So shout out to that platform that allows teachers with a classical focus especially to do their work. And it's tonerow.com. And what I like to do is just post a link letting you know that my meet and greet is updated. And so you can connect with me online to find out when that is. So basically you decide if you want to do a 15-minute meet and greet just to find out what you're getting into before you get into it, and see me over there for that. So shout out to Tone Row. Now, my next shout out is going to have more of a serious tone and a playful tone, because by now you guys know how I feel about Spreaker. I'm really just so grateful to be on this platform. I started out on Blog Talk Radio. Blog Talk Radio is also part of the same company that is over Spreaker, and I like the platform. I personally like it. I feel like they help us promote. I feel like they help us build our podcast. I have nothing but positive things to say about the Spreaker podcast. I feel that my Spreaker podcast is growing. Now, do I have 5,000 followers at this time? No, I don't. But I feel like I will. And so Spreaker has great visibility on the internet, and I believe, a big believer, what you do on the outside determines your inside build in this case. Sometimes it's the other way around. It's what you're doing on the inside and that you're pushing out. But I think that, let's say, for instance, if you were doing a lot of work in the community and then you're able to come online and really bring those people with you, then it's going to help you to really build your podcast even faster. So I'm not sure I agree with those who are grumbling and rumbling about Spreaker and saying they're not helping them and they had to go to other platforms. I saw that whole dialogue online. I thought, oh, that's really unfortunate, because I think when you're in a corporate environment like that, you really do try to help as much as you can without being biased. But you do see at the very top those who have the marketing budget, the advertising budget, the followers, all of that they're, of course, they're going to be more successful and probably will be able to build a lot faster than somebody that's starting with guerrilla marketing or starting from the ground up. But you know what? I'm grateful either way. I feel like Spreaker gives you a lot more visibility, and it would be easy to say, you know what, let me just get a voice recording app and then just put myself out there. It's not quite the same, because how are you going to control your visibility unless you have a real plan for that? So being on a platform that's as visible as Spreaker, that has very strong marketing engine, and they really are looking out for podcasters, I just wanted to give them a really big shout out and say, I'm really grateful for you guys. Keep up the good work. Be safe. And thank you for all you do for independent podcasters like myself. Okay, now speaking of which, I know that it may seem like I like to self-promote myself a lot on this podcast. So I know there's a place and a time for that. So I apologize if I've broken any rules with that regard, but I really am trying hard to get myself out there and to turn a corner, if you will. Now there's a project that I wanted to mention, and it's on my Facebook page. Let me see if I can go there with you for the moment. So you're going to hear some typing, and you're going to hear some movement as I go over to Facebook. Now, again, the reason I do this podcast is because of you, because of my students. You're the ones who make it possible for me to be here. Because if it were not for you, I promise you, I would not be doing this podcast. You were the ones that drove me to the brink to say, I need to do a podcast. I need to be talking about this stuff. And that's exactly what happened. So if it were not for my students, I would not have known about this composer, a lady composer, woman composer, if you prefer to say woman over lady. But she's a female composer living in the greater New York area. I believe Pennsylvania. She's basically based in Pennsylvania. Jennifer Higdon. And I found out about her through one of my students who's working on some of her music. Now, what's cool is that she's posted this project. And I thought, wow, this is such a cool project. It's called the Purple Project. I said, we'll mention it on the episode, which we are. It's in partnership with the Curtis Institute of Music. The first time I heard of the Curtis was through one of my old professors who was a composer. So, they're serious about composition. And I think that professor ended up just getting a certificate. And then he was able to go on to build a really huge career. And get really big recognition by some of the biggest names in composition. But if you are a composer, you are serious about music, you know what it takes to collab with someone, and you are also looking for a monetary award, this is huge. It's called the Curtis Institute of Music, the Purple Project for Democracy, and it's online. All you have to do is put in your information, send your files, send your bio, send your samples. And also, if you're collabing with somebody, just put their name up there. And it's so funny because I just recently heard some music from one of my colleagues. I thought, wow, we should collab. We should do something. There's an app for that too, by the way. So I've been checking out this app online for teaching online called Soundtrap, and it's so much fun. I've never had so much fun on an app before, where everything was just right at your fingertips. There's no reason why you can't create music on the spot using this app. So if you want to check that out, please do. Now, all this information is on our CMajor Before the Show page on Facebook. And then above that, I said I was going to mention, now this came to my attention earlier today, that, and it's kind of sad, but we're not going to make it that sad here. The article says many wealthy parents won't send kids back to school this fall. And then they have their opinion about that. But it was such an interesting article, and I just thought, well, where do piano lessons fit in that? So I wanted to bring that up. Read the article for yourself. Get your own impressions. Feel free to message us here on social media. We always like to hear from you. And then I think I had a notification that I wanted to respond to, so let me do that while I'm over here. It's just telling me how many people will. Okay, and then I have some people liking my photo. So let me say thanks to him. Put my little sticker. Don't you just love social media? People are writing to you all the time. And I can always post a little hey, Snoopy hey. Because Snoopy has defined my whole life, in case you guys didn't know that. Ever since that day I did show my parents I could pick up music and run with it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you a recording. And this recording has to do with my project that I just finished. That is giving me a teaching artist certificate. So I had to give myself an applause and my colleagues an applause. We finished our program. So one thing I'm going to play for you now, this is exclusive. They didn't even hear this. When I presented my project, I presented it as a slideshow. I didn't even say anything, but I did record something ahead of time just in case. So you're going to hear that right now exclusively here on CMajor Before the Show. You're the first one to hear this. And it's just talking about some of the experiences. So I really want to paint a picture for you about what I've gone through as a private teacher in the greater New York area, some of the things that I have to encounter to work with my students on a weekly basis, and all of that's going to change because now with COVID-19, we're at least, and that's according to this article I just pointed out, we're at least 12 to 18 months away from a vaccine or something that will make it safe for us to gather again and to take that wonder out of your mind whether or not you're in the presence of someone who could be a carrier of this virus. So just imagine that. It really is going to change the way that I work as a private piano teacher. But anyway, this is my own recording, voice recording, of what my journey has been like. For my introduction, I chose the music of Louis Vega, a New York-based DJ, because he has a reputation for taking on a journey throughout the world through music. The track is called Angels. I've enjoyed my journey in the TAC at TC program. I feel that we have all kind of become angels for each other, watching over our success in the program. We are in this together. None of us has done anything like this before. I chose to focus on the number 8 and the color purple as a theme for today's presentation. Scenes Otto, 8 Scenes, Memories of 8 Months, by Carol Porter. The home is full of family life. In the kitchen, cats and dogs run around, being themselves happily and noisily. Outside, the anxious piano teacher rings the bell and hopes to be let in out of the rain. "Let's play piano," says the teacher. Quickly, we sit tall and talk and learn together. Purple dot. P, please. U, understand. R, respond. P, play. L, love. E, expect. D, do. O, operate. T, think. At another family's home, little children come marching by with Hot Wheels, carrying baby dolls, and Build-A-Bears. Challenging my approach. 60% of the time, the Purple Dot Challenge works every time. My student roster is up by 40% from 2018 to 2019. Students from all over the world account for 98% of my teaching studio. Over the course of 1 year, my students dream of pianos falling through the clouds. The sun goes down in New Jersey. I still have not taught any preludes and fugues by Bach yet. I know, thinking out loud, I'll talk about this on a podcast. How will I assess my effectiveness? What is my future? It does not include Johann Sebastian Bach, but it does include podcasting. So, how do I get my students to think outside the purple dot? First, I've got to remind myself to think outside the dot. During moments of non-creativity and problem solving, we only focus on the dot in the center of the page. By only focusing on the obvious dark spot, we may lose our chances to think with imagination within and outside in the white space. What may exist in the white space? Pigs and dogs. What do pigs and dogs have in common? Truffles. Puppies and pigs. Deep breath. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I feel better now. Moving on. The teaching artist class has reminded me to adapt my teaching to an individual, getting them to think beyond the obvious. We can be happy, have fun, and explore music making more when we find inspiration for new ideas and strategies. I now encourage my students to think outside the purple dot. I can hold up a picture of a cow eating grass, or I can present a purple dot on a piece of paper instead to the student. Where is the grass? The cow ate it all. Where is the cow? She went to look for more grass. The TAC at TC program influenced my teaching artist practice by reminding me to focus on playtime in my teaching and be mindful of when playtime is over. I want to have students who go happily back to their families' activities in their homes, prancing with high hopes that they've tried on something new and learned to think outside the purple dot. I will try to assess my teaching situations more as I go, to understand more qualitatively the relationships that I build and the cultures that I encounter. I will work to share more quantitative results of learning to manage up to the families that I work with. How often will I assess? the balance of musical, creative, and imaginative work, theory, technique, and notational focus in my lessons. Thank you to Dr. Costadero. If I could rewind the 8 months that we spent together, would I do anything differently? No. The sun has fallen down on our class. 8 times sings the cuckoo and the clock. The 8 people that helped me see where I need to develop most for this class include Dr. Costadero, Katie, Claudia, Paul, Maria, Yukiko, Suchitra, and Trey. A big thank you to all of my classmates and colleagues. It's been great seeing you. A special thank you to Katie, Paul, and Claudia. Paul, Claudia, and Katie. Claudia, Katie, and Paul. A heartfelt thanks to Maria, Yukiko, and Suchitra, and Trey for our October meetup in Riverside Park searching for flow. Thank you to Dr. Costadero. What will I do next? What aims do I have? To try to figure out how to keep my studio going online amid COVID-19 and recreate a sustainable living teaching remotely. Since 2002, I've been a barista, on, off, and on again. In my barista work, I've been able to share music-making talk with random coffee and tea drinkers. I'd like to more consistently share thoughts, impressions, questions, stories, etc. with others over a great cup of coffee or tea. Where would I like to be in 8 months' time? I'd like to be on my way to helping others, becoming better at making friends, and spreading the power of optimism. A special photo treat, a photo of some of my students at a New Jersey recital event. I'd like to stay connected to the cohort through coffee and conversation. You've all inspired me and piqued my interest. Thanks to Teachers College, we now share in the history and legacy of a passionate commitment to teaching artistry and the teaching artist community. Thank you. Free coffee. I'm offering free coffee in person. I'd like to stay connected through coffee and conversation, staying 6 feet away. As a barista, I enjoy talking about music, music making, and sharing coffee culture knowledge. You can find me in New Jersey once we reopen. Ask me where. Or when we can come together at TC again, coffee's on me in New York. And so that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that and you heard it first here, right here on CMajor before the show. So what I'm going to do now is say goodbye because it's time now to go over to the CMajor radio show. So we do everything here first and then we go over there and we do some visual things with you and to keep the fun going. Also, look out for our post in CMajor's classroom. And next week, the Black Keys. Not talking about the group without Fergie, but talking about the piano. But join us so we can talk about how to put your fingers to use in a certain finger number order on the piano keys. Until then, be safe, stay home, keep 6 feet apart, and I'll see you next week. Take care.